Welcome to the Axial Podcast. Axial is an early-stage investment firm based in San Francisco. We partner with great founders and inventors investing in early-stage life science companies often when they are no more than an idea. Axial is fanatical about helping the rare inventor who is compelled to build their own enduring business.
We are recording, Abhishek. Well, thanks for doing this. Last minute. So I'm really excited to talk about your story, how you built Elucidata into like one of these leading data companies in biotech. And then also thanks for the tip on Up when I'm looking to after this conversation.
You should check that out.
Just for context, Abhishek runs Elucidata. He's co-founder and CEO. And Elucidata is actually used by one of my portfolio companies, Serenova Bio. And really awesome product in terms of harmonizing data sets in bio and making them useful for machine learning. So great to have you here. I'd love to maybe a brief introduction and we can go from there.
Yeah, no, Josh, thanks for having me. You keep showing up in my inbox, and I'm part of your Slack community. So find it to see your face, put a face to the name, and
Cool.
and then I appreciate the opportunity that you extended to us. A little bit about my own story. So I was trained in academia. The usual grad school postdoc. I was at U Chicago, and then later at MIT to do my postdoc. It was in computational biology, and for the longest time, I aspired to be a professor in academia, and for a variety of reasons, at some point, it did not make sense to pursue that. Luckily for me, I learned about a small company in Cambridge, very close to where I was at MIT. That was coming up, and one of my friends who was in the lab that I was at postdoc, his PI at Harvard Medical School. He had started a company already, and they were looking for someone with my background, and that worked out really nicely for me. That company was Agios Pharmaceuticals, and as I look back, right, I think that was a huge inflection point for me to switch from academia to industry and still do quite cutting edge science, publish, and at the same time, most importantly, do something which has a very intimate and profound impact for patients, right? And I learned all of that at Agios. So in many ways, I feel that Agios is where I started the second phase of my career. I was there for 5.5 years, 6 years. It was incredible. Great team, great science, great mission. And one of the things that I tried to pick up and learn from my CEO at Agios was to remember that it's all about patience, at the end of the day. And all the slides that you make and all the code that you write or all the funds that you raise, right? At the end of the day, it's important to remember that you're serving a patient and the family, right? And David Schenken, who's now, I think he's moved on to other things, Google Ventures.
Yeah.
He would take a lot of pain and effort to remind us of that, right? So there were some physical reminders. For example, when you entered Agios, there was in the foyer, in the lobby, there were pictures of friends and family members of colleagues who were lost to cancer. It's a very visceral reminder of why do you show up on Mondays, right? Why do you work late nights? And I remember in one of the company retreats, he had invited a patient. She was she had an inborn error of metabolism, and she was fine. She was teaching, but her lifestyle was heavily compromised. And she was very brave. She shared a very intimate story with the entire company. Everyone was teary-eyed. It was quite a remarkable story, and it's so funny because scientists are trained to be cynical, right? But this was a very emotional. Like for an hour, everyone was quiet and listening to her. And one of the things that she said at the end, which has stayed with me, is hey, for someone like me, she, all she has is hope that some scientist somewhere is working on that rare disease or that hard to cure disease, and that's the hope that she's hanging on, right? And if she requested us, right, if you can do one more thing for 1 more hour, right, do an experiment, do an analysis, one more meeting, right? Do that, because that hour means a lot to me and my family, right? And that was quite a remarkable call, right, to me and my peers, right? And I fully understand and appreciate that as a data scientist myself, which is what I was doing at Agios. I would suboptimally use many hours in my week, right? Like doing some things which were just not, the best, usage of my hour. And in many ways, I think that was the inception of what I wanted to do next. I started thinking about it, and a couple of years later, I started Elucidata in 2015. I was trained in computational biology. My training was in statistical physics, uh, but I had been working on biological problems of different, nature in my PhD, protein folding, and in my postdoc, it was computational immunology. But I had to learn, a lot of biochemistry when I started at Agios, so I learned it on the job.
Cool.
And biology is very, broad, right? They're very specific things, and you just have to be ready to embrace grunt work, right? So I remember when I got my job offer from Agios, there was a few weeks of break because they had to, take some time to process my visa and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I remember those days because I just memorized all the biochemistry of metabolism, cell metabolism, because Agios was a metabolism company, and at that time I don't remember it anymore as well. I knew all the enzymes and their isoforms, and what reaction uh, started glycolysis and how many ATPs were consumed at these stages. It was just, you had to just dig deep and be ready to embrace the details, which are quite important, right? For one, they give you the language to talk to your colleagues, right, to understand them. And two, like, it also educates your work a lot, right? So yeah, I learned a lot of that on the job, and I was very glad to have an environment where that was encouraged.
Cool. That's awesome. And then like for Agios, Agios is like one of the most successful biotech companies in the last decade. I think there's like 3 drug approvals or something.
Yes, yes.
So like, do you feel you got lucky to just find Agios, or did you actually like run a process as you made that transition from academia to industry? Like, did you kind of like did you like compare companies and pick Agios, or do you just feel that, we just kind of came to your network and came kind of easy, it came natural to join that company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it was very opportunistic. So I think, I was lucky to know the right people at the right time. Jason, he was my friend. He's my friend. He was postdoc, and his PI was starting this. So that's how I learned about it. I did not run quite a process, but there were a couple of options that I was evaluating quite seriously. One of them was with D-Shaw, and one was with Agios. Both equally, exciting in different ways. For one, I had to move to New York. One, I had to stay back, in Boston. D-Shaw, that job profile was very similar to what I had done in my PhD, and that was, not quite thrilling. Agios was less familiar to me in terms of the science that they were doing, and I thought that would be a good place to, spend the next few years. And in hindsight, I feel, life does not give you a chance to do control experiments, but I am glad I made that choice. So it was, fairly opportunistic and lucky.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think if you joined D.E. Shaw, you probably would have got paid a lot more money, but you probably would never have left.
Yes.
I have friends work at D.E. Shaw, and like they don't leave.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't think Elucidata would have got started if you
maybe not. Yeah.
So okay, so you start Elucidata in 2015.
Yes.
What can you just explain what you do first?
Yeah, at Elucidata.
Yeah.
Well, personally, I don't do much at this point, but what the company does is greatly influenced by my own experience at Agios, which was not unique by any means. It was quite universal, and I have learned this over and over again through our customers, through my peers, where most of the time I would spend was just cleaning the data, right, putting it in the right format. There's a lot of scrubbing, showing off your Excel skills, or writing that hacky script in R or Python to play with data frames, Excel pivoting. There's a lot of that, right, that went on. And just to give you a flavor as to how these things started, right, at Agios, often my peers, my boss or some colleague would ask, hey, can you look up at all those experiments that we did in last 4 months where, you know, this gene was up or that metabolite was down? In plain English, that's a very straightforward ask. And, to be fair, it's a very reasonable ask, right? Like, you should be able to do that because you did those experiments, you have all the information. But in practice, that was insanely hard.
Yeah.
Right? And one was just getting access to data. Well, let's say you have access to data, then they're all in different formats, put them together, and finally, you derive some insight out of it, right? And insight was the currency that everyone understood. Everyone was excited about that. That's where my glory was, right? But what was under-recognized and underappreciated is all the time and effort that went to get the data ready for that insight analysis, right? Generation. And to be fair, even I did not appreciate that it took so much work, right? Because I would not even talk about it. I would not even acknowledge it. I would even not even know that I could get help for cleaning data, right? And this was, in my Agios days, but increasingly we saw that over and over again in different companies, in different stages, in academia, like labs at Yale, or in small biotech companies like Agios, in large pharma companies like Pfizer, Genentech, Novartis, you name it, where the proverbial, like the urban legend of data scientists, right, where 80% of your time is just cleaning the data and 20% is analysis. And that has shaped what we want to do at Elucidata. We want to flip that ratio, where you spend 20% of your time getting access to clean data and 80% of your time on analysis and insight generation, which is where the value is, right? So we see ourselves as enablers for all the scientists, like I was at Agios and others who are again trying to bring drugs and therapies and diagnostic tools for patients.
Cool. I mean, that's like, honestly, I used to do a lot of bioinformatics when I was a professional scientist, and yeah, just like you spend a lot of time on spreadsheets or different genomic files, or using what was the programming like awk at AWK?
Awk.
Gosh, I just all these different like you're just like probing data sets and trying to align them, and it's a pain in the neck. And so maybe to back it up a little bit.
Josh, I don't know if you have seen this. Sorry to interrupt you. There's a meme that's quite popular, and I like this a lot. In the first panel of the meme is someone at the front of the room is asking, "Hey, who wants clean data?" And everyone in the room puts up their hand. And the next panel is who wants to clean data, and there's radio silence, right? No one wants to do that. That's what we saw over and over again. In my own experience, I would suck it up and do it for like 5 data sets, a week, and I would not sign up for doing it for 50 data sets, right? For historical data sets, right? Or new data sets that were coming out in public domain. I would not raise my hand for that, right? And I believe that at Elucidata we learned that's a huge opportunity, and that's where we are focused and committed to, and we have made some decent progress to address that problem.
Cool. So it's 2014, 15ish, and then you're solving these problems at Agios. I think Agios had already gone public.
Yes.
So that was nice. Congrats. And so, what was the kind of the trigger or the spark for you to say, "Hey, let me go start this company"? Was it like finding a co-founder? Was it customer pool? What was the kind of the spark to say, "Let me leave Agios, pretty risky, and just start a startup and go all in"?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll be very honest, right? I think a lot of that was naivety on my part, right? Agios was a very good gig for me. Like, they compensate you well, great colleagues, great science. As you said, it was one of the most successful companies in last decade. Being part of that from early days was, huge. And I could have, stayed there, I feel. But I also realized that I was at a different place personally, right? The company was at a different place. And I did not do any kind of, market research or such, but I felt for sure that, the things that I wanted to do was essentially make tools, right, for drug discovery, not necessarily make the drugs myself, or like be in that organization, right? So the agenda that I had to pursue, I think Agios would have been a great beneficiary of that, but not the best place to build those things in terms of recruiting that talent pool, or having that mandate, right? It was not quite aligned. There was an intersection, but not quite aligned. There are a few other things in my personal life too, right? Like my wife, she was insanely supportive. She still is, and I cannot thank her enough.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yes, I think if our conversation gets to that point, right, I'll it's a huge ask, right, from your family to support you in this, and she was very supportive. She had a stable gig at MIT, so that was helpful. We did not have a mortgage. We did not have any kids then. Agios had gone public, so that was good for my public health. So I did not do any kind of Excel analysis like should I do this or not. I just jumped in it, right? And I had my co-founder who I could rely heavily on. I had deep trust in him, and I thought like, hey, let's commit to this and explore, and that's how it started.
That's awesome. Okay, so then let's. I think one thing too is like, you built one of the few pure play software companies in biotech that has had success.
Yep.
And it's like super duper hard. So maybe we can talk a lot about, the challenges and opportunities to build better software in biotech.
Yep.
I think when you talk to a lot of early stage companies when they get started, how did you find your first customers? What was that? Did you just hit up Agios, or did you did you focus on a particular category initially? How did you convince them to pay you money? Was it initially services, or did you kind of get them to agree to like subscriptions or something?
Yep. No, great question. And let me first acknowledge that it is hard. Period. Right. Building a software company in biotech is hard. Building a software company or building any company is hard. Right. This is harder. And then when we started, I think there were two options ahead of us. One option was to raise some capital and build a product, right? We were very intentional about being a product company on day one. That I think both me and my co-founder were very intentional about. The other option was to just get into market, right, and have our customers fund the product development. And capital aside, right, I think we really wanted to make something that the customers actually wanted and were willing to pay for it. And none of these options are easy, or we just decided to go with the second one. And again, Agios was a great supporter, where we had a customer, Agios in this case, pretty much on day one, right?
Cool.
And for first 3 years, we bootstrapped the company, doing services which, in hindsight, were variety of services, building dashboards, building pipelines, building doing this and that. Just to pay the bills. But again, we were very intentional from day one to build a product, and we learned a lot from the market. We learned how to identify a need that was quite critical, where our customers would pay us hopefully substantial amounts of money to be worthwhile, right? Like we should in return create enough value for them to demand that kind of contract size, right? And I think that educated us quite a lot. And as we got closer to launching the product, then we started knocking on the doors of what I call friends, families, and fools. Cool. To give us some capital, right, to accelerate the growth. And that was when I think our ambitions as a company, as a group, changed quite dramatically, where we did a seed round led by Hyperplane.
Cool.
They're a Boston-based fund, early stage company, and they have been spectacular partners for us. And then that round closed in 2018 summer. So the first phase of the company was just like going the market, learning from the customers, getting paid, bootstrap, very lean, and then build the product.
Cool. I think so. I think that's kind of, it seems to be all the case studies of the successful SaaS companies in life sciences. It took a few years for them to like be able productize services and find product market fit? Because why do you think, maybe one quick question is like, why do you think it takes a little bit longer to find product market fit in biotech? Is it just the number of customers are smaller? Is it like some sort of like maybe skepticism on biotech? Like, if you had to go back in time, do you think Elucidata could have just launched a product and been successful, or did you kind of need that space in the beginning to find product market fit?
Right. Again, that's a very good question. Very worthy of like an hour-long conversation just on that.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly biased and limited by my own experience. I think there's definitely a component of the market, right, where there are multiple things. Like I would say, there's a very classic conflict of build versus buy, and you don't want to be in a situation where you're competing with your customers, right? You have to define what is complementary and where you can help them, and that's definitely part of the dynamics. And I have said this often, and I certainly believe it very deeply, that all of us are builders and buyers. And my own company at Elucidata, right, we have to continuously make a decision as to what we will buy and what we'll build, right? We cannot possibly sign up for building something like Jira, a ticketing issue, right? Like we would just buy it. And all of us and our customers also have to answer that question for themselves, and that's definitely a part of the dynamics. The other part is also, I think clarity or lack of education. For example, if I was to just go back to my Agios days, as a data scientist, I did not even know that I could get help, right, for data cleaning, something that Elucidata does now, right? And I believe there are a lot of data scientists like I was at Agios who are still like, doing what I was doing at Agios, manually in a non-scalable way, with, which works quite well for them with their artisanal, awk scripts or Perl hacks and our, pivoting commands and whatnot, melting the table. It's just that they don't even know that, hey, this could be automated, or you can hire a vendor like Elucidata, the others too, to take it off their plate so that they can focus more on high value problems, right? So there's lack of education. There's this dynamics of build versus buy. There's a market size, not number of companies that you can go to is not huge, but I think that's true for other sectors too, like financial industry, right? Where there are around 5,000 banks, right? Few of them are big, huge.
Yeah.
Most of them are small, and a lot of very successful fintech companies have been built to serve that few thousand companies, right? I think biotech or life sciences at large will have that too. We are in early days of that. We feel that we are very fortunate with the timing, and you're seeing a lot of activity, right, from VCs, from young companies that are coming up, like Latch, where you mentioned, or SciSpot, many of them, right? We certainly see ourselves as not, we're still learning and we're still getting started, but there's definitely that, and there's a a question of when will a first unicorn, or 100 million revenue company, SaaS company, will come out in life sciences. And Benchling seems to be on that track. I don't know if they have already crossed it, but they have been very successful. They're a SaaS company. But I remember, like, when I was in Cambridge, there was a group of folks from MIT and Broad. There was a, they would meet up every few weeks. Hammer and Nail, that was the name of the group.
Yeah.
They would just talk about problems. And I remember John Kilty at Third Rock, he had extended that invitation to me. And one of the themes that would come up all the time is, when will be there a billion-dollar software company in life sciences? If you just look at names, right, there are only a handful of them. Schrodinger is one, Benchling is another. If you from whatever I can gather from publicly available reports, their market cap is greater than billion. So there has to be first one, and we have a couple, right? This will change more in days to come. If you look at AWS adoption, right, that all has happened in last 10 years or less than a decade, right? In life sciences now it's a default. When I was at Agios, we would have to go there was a lot of back and forth in just getting an AWS account, right? So things are changing, and changing in the right direction. we see that data scientists are higher in the first five team members in a small biotech company. That is not true even just a few years back, right? There are roles like chief data officer and chief, so things are changing, but at the same time, biotech companies are not like Netflix or tech companies. We believe, and that's one of our key thesis, that biotech companies of the future will look more like tech companies.
Yeah.
And that's what we are here to enable too.
And that's pretty insightful in terms of like comparing biotech SaaS to fintech progression. In terms of the market structure is pretty similar in terms of like number of companies are lower, and the big ones and small ones, and very few in between. And so I think that build versus buy mixture shifting, where pharma companies are now willing to buy more tools, as long as they're better than what they can build is important. Maybe back to Elucidata. So maybe we talk about the first customer, Agios, raise some money, and then you're in the thicket of building a SaaS company in biotech. So you're in this, you live this. And so could you talk about like, what was the first product? Because the product you have now is pretty expansive. RNA-seq, proteomics, metabolomics, like you can ingest a lot of different data sets, harmonize them, and then enable a company. What was that first product? Was it focused on like, I'm assuming RNA-seq, but maybe what was the first product focused on?
So that has again been a journey and an evolution of sorts for us. So our first focus was not even on the product, just on the technology, right? And the technology that we are working on, and I think we have a very differentiated technology here, has two pillars. Pillar number one is what I would call data engineering, right, where we deal with data in let's say a dozen formats, and our goal is to bring it into one consistent tabular schema every single time. Okay, and that's pillar number one. Pillar number two is which is very heavy on NLP, and we take the metadata of three things, like the data set and the rows and the columns, so features and samples, and we harmonize the metadata of all of them, right? When we have done both of those two things, we call the data set to be ML ready, right? And so just to give you a little more color, right? You would have diseases where scientists would name hepatocellular carcinoma, or next day the same scientists would call it HCC, and 2 days later it would be liver cancer, right? Now, as a human expert, you know that these things mean the same, but the software does not, right? So certainly, if you want to do some AI initiative or ML modeling, you're compromised. And who is going to clean this up, right? So this is the tech that we are trying to build, and this is our pillar number two, where we would link hepatocellular carcinoma, HCC, and liver cancer to a particular ontology, and then when you find it, you will see all those three hits. Now, this is true for data set level metadata. It's true for sample level metadata. It's also true for features, like for example, you use gene symbol or entree ID or spot ID, and again, you use it different days, different IDs, and you're compromised. So we are trying to harmonize that piece. And the first act was to go to a data that is in public domain and just test our technology, right? And we did that with around 90 terabytes of biomedical data from 30 different sources, and that included NGS data, that included mass spec-based proteomics, metabolomics data, that included non-omics data like flow cytometry and such, some clinical notes too. But when it came to product, I think one of the challenges was not to do a whole lot, right? So we have narrowed down the scope of the product quite massively. And again, for a stage, a young company like Elucidata, the challenge is to do less. And often the temptation, and personally, for me being a scientist, right, trained as a scientist, I always go back to signing up for this and that, right? That's not quite helpful, and that's a lesson for me to remain focused, keep my company focused. So the product question that you had, we are focusing just on two data types, RNA-seq, bulk and single cell, and we are taking data from public domain and making it findable and usable, right? That's the narrow focus. Anything else, we enable that by providing our services, and that has been very helpful for us to get quite an exciting traction in the industry. Right? So 4 of the top 10 pharma companies are working with us, and a couple of dozen smaller biotech companies are leveraging our product and services to accelerate the discovery programs.
Cool. And you have Serenova. Definitely, Leon loves you guys. So
Yes.
so
Yeah.
Elucidata really sped up a lot of Serenova's discovery work. So I appreciate that. I think
if only you can ask him to write a testimonial for us, because we always run into this legal contracting where our customers, our champions, are very keen to give us but we don't.
I'll talk to Leon. Okay, I'll talk to Leon this Friday. I talked to him every Friday, so I'm gonna bring it up with him and say, hey, I'll talk to Aaron and the whole team on Friday. But cool. Okay. One thing about Elucidata, the comp I make to your company is like Fivetran. Familiar Fivetran. Fivetran is kind of like.
I'm quite familiar with Fivetran. I mean, well, as much as their website would tell me,
Actually, the CEO of Fivetran, he's a PhD neuroscientist. Just on a side note, but he, for context, Fivetran is a enterprise software company, more general, focused on integrating data sets from like CRMs and a bunch of other sources and harmonizing them.
Yes.
And it's actually pretty hard. I think that company was founded like in 2012.
It is hard, yeah.
And then it took them like 5 years to get successful.
Yeah.
And only in the last 2 years have they become like really successful.
Yeah.
So it was a long journey. And I just remember like they have these really cool stories of like how difficult it was to like make sure they delivered data from a CRM that was exactly the same. For Elucidata, do you have any like funny stories like that when you were structuring all that public data? Was there like little issues that were a pain in the neck for you for like years or months?
Oh man, tons of stories. It's funny that you bring up Fivetran because I go on their website almost every week just to check them out, and and it's funny because I've shied away from using that we are Fivetran of biomedical data because most of my audience do not know about Fivetran. But we as much as we can gather, we love what they're doing, and we see ourselves like playing a very similar role for our customers. And in some ways, if you think about it, it's the challenges are more nuanced and more specific to the vertical that we are in, where if you're an enterprise, you have a CRM, and more or less all your customer data is in that CRM, right? Salesforce or Pipedrive or HubSpot, whatever that may be. And guess what? Those CRMs have some programmatic access, right? But if you go back to around a dozen resources that are in public domain that our customers use, Geo or TCGA or something released by Broad, all of them have, if you're lucky, some of them will have programmatic access. The interface of that API is very different, can change anytime, right? So in some sense, ingesting the data at that scale is massively harder, right? We had to, for example, I'll give you some numbers. We have around 40,000 data sets from Geo, RNA-seq data sets that are harmonized, cleaned up on Poly. And there are around 20-25 data sets that are being added on Geo every single day. And we have a real-time, update where we pull the data. And now these data sets are processed differently, and we had to standardize that. Now processing, 20 RNA-seq data sets daily, which roughly has around let's say 400 samples, is a non-trivial task. And if you were to do that at scale that we have done, it's highly non-trivial, where we had to build a computational infrastructure for our own sake, process all of them through one single pipeline. For single cell, it's even harder. So we have published some of the blogs. We'll publish more. But the point I'm trying to make is that the heterogeneity and the domain expertise that you need for single cell and bulk RNA-seq is very nuanced, and that makes it challenging, right, to build something like this. But in an abstract sense, we are trying to do, at least we think we are trying to do something very similar to uh, Fivetran. And of course, these comparisons are always tricky because there are always nuances that Fivetran is dealing with, which we are not, and we are dealing with, and they are not. But yeah, that's a great parallel.
Yeah, I think Fivetran has to deal with like so many different like inputs.
Yeah,
Seems like Elucidata, not only that, but you also have to deal with like so much variability in like data quality, and like I'm assuming I just know for a fact like an RNA-seq package from one institution is definitely not the same as RNA-seq or a data set from another institution. It's a lot of, especially on the academic side, like so much variability in terms of quality annotation. So you have to kind of, I'm assuming that's especially it took you a few years probably even to like make a dent there and do that for 90 terabytes. That's insane. So maybe we can touch upon the other pillar of Elucidata, which is the the NLP side, the ML side. I have a friend, Jacob Oppenheim. We actually did a podcast with him last year, and he had this really cool framework of, for biology, you need to train your models to do unphysical things. Which means like you need to be able to give them data sets that are helpful for them to know what to do and what not to do. And sometimes biologists only do the experiments that are positive. For Elucidata, maybe in general, like why is data structuring so important for like application for like drug development, diagnostics, and other things?
Yeah, no, so the two threads here that I hear, one is just the retraining the large language models or NLP models. And this very timely conversation. There's so many LLMs that are coming out, large language models, and our thesis is that well, one, it's hard to make a LLM. It's very expensive. It requires a lot of expertise. It requires a lot of time. And I think what we have seen, even if you put all those aside, right? Let's say we had the time and the money to do that. I think what we are seeing is that there's a lot of value in retraining that, and that gives you bigger bang for buck, and that's how we have approached this problem. So more specifically, we have taken BERT, which was published by Google a few years back. And we have retrained that on experimental designs for RNA-seq, right, where we extracted all that information from PubMed, and we retrained BERT, and we call that PolyBERT, and that's where we have created value, right? So now PolyBERT outperforms BERT and other models when it comes to very specific tasks like recognizing entities like cell type, cell line, disease, regression of disease, or survival. These are very specific fields, entities that we do much better, almost as well as human curators themselves. We definitely outperform a more horizontal tool like BERT, right? And the magic was in retraining, right? Continuously retraining. Now, the second piece is we also don't see human creators as being replaced. We see them as being enabled by PolyBERT. So we have, around 40 curators who constantly use our curation platform to curate these datasets from public domain or from your proprietary sources at the three levels that I mentioned, right? A dataset, sample, and feature. So these two have been like lessons for us, where we retrain the model, not build a new one, and keep humans in the loop, right? Which we call, and others have called this too, right? Active learning. And as human curators curate data, the models get better and smarter. With these two things, like I think we have been able to hit this kind of scale of pushing 90 terabytes over the last couple of years, which would not have been possible otherwise.
Interesting. And so like on the so what I'm hearing is that like there's an interplay between like training models and then like maybe the better question is this, like how do you think data structuring keeps up with model progression? Because it seems like models are always updated every year.
Yeah.
And then the underlying data sets, it's, at least from my perspective, it seems like the models are progressing much faster than
Yeah.
our ability to structure the data.
Yeah.
Especially in biotech.
Yeah.
How do you think, I think Elucidata is playing a role here.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that it has parity to, like, making it easy to structure data to make better models? Because it seems like, knowing the AI field just a little, there's always new models coming out. LLMs are really the hot trend now.
Yeah.
A long time ago, it was like, TensorFlow and other types of neural networks. So, how do you think data structuring keeps up with all this progress on the AI side?
Yeah. So one thing that we have seen this over and over again, and others have talked about this too, right? Where we have to almost get on the same page, where having access to clean and linked data is central to predictive ML, right?
Yeah.
And there's a famous quote from Vas Narasimhan, who's the CEO of Novartis, that we use a lot in our slides, where he says that often organizations underestimate what it takes to clean and linked data, right? And they start an AI initiative, and 6 months later, 9 months later, they realize that some very highly trained ML modelers, ML scientists are cleaning data. If you take is more successful and public story of AlphaFold, right? I think the kind of success that they've had would not have been possible if RCSB did not have PDB files from all the labs over many years, as structured as it is, right? It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And a lot of stakeholders like those labs and NIH came together to make that resource available to the scientific community at large, right? So the value of having structured data is essential, and we have to get on the same page, right? And we also have to acknowledge that we don't often understand and appreciate the kind of expertise and time it takes to do that, right? It's very, again, if I go back to my own experience at Agios, right? Very savvy scientists, very deep domain experts, but they almost trivially ask for, like, hey, give me this 40 data sets, right? And that's not an easy task. You're not quite set up to do that, right? If you had the right tools and infrastructure, yes, then it becomes almost like a snap of finger and you have that. But that's not where we live. That's not what the reality is. And even if you look at the all the excitement that ChatGPT has generated, right? I believe there's a lot of work that must have happened to make those prompts, right? Clean them up or put them in a particular form and structure to educate that model, right? So as an industry, like, and as a community at large, we have to acknowledge and resource and invest in making sure that the infrastructure is there where your AI initiatives will succeed. Otherwise, we'll be running a big risk, right?
Cool. One quick question from your purview: what are some of the fastest growing data sets in bio? Is it proteomics? What are you kind of seeing from your customer base? Like, are like people producing more and more protein sequencing data, or is it just single cell sequencing? Just like keep on. Is it like is that growth just still torrid?
Yeah, I think the usual culprits, right? Genomic data is huge, but often they're not quite available. They're often behind some kind of regulatory, for good reasons. Transcriptomic is another one, bulk RNA-seq, that's growing quite rapidly. Single cell has generated a lot of interest. It's quite very eagerly sought after. Then you have a bunch of mass spec based omics like proteomics, metabolomics, lipidomics. But there are some inherent challenges with mass spec omics where it's not as quote unquote well interpreted by a broader community like let's say transcriptomic data is. So there some challenges there, but these are the data types that we hear a lot, and there's tons of data with not as much size, but a lot of velocity, right? That comes outside of this space, like flow cytometry data set is being used in discovery space, in manufacturing, and a lot of really powerful questions can be asked, but it's compromised because the data is not quite clean and linked. And again, we see us playing a role in non-omics data as well as we move forward.
Cool. Yes. Let's be the Fivetran for bio. Let's
Yeah,
do it.
man. Yeah.
And Fivetran took, to be honest, Fivetran took like 7 years to get really, really successful. So
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
2 years from now, I think Elucidata is going to be a billion-dollar SaaS company. But it's on the Fivetran trajectory. But to kind of wrap up the conversation, any like final lessons, or at least at this point in time, any lessons you've kind of, I think throughout the conversation we've kind of alluded to a few, but any kind of lessons for maybe aspiring entrepreneurs or people who are trying to make that jump to industry?
Yeah. So I did not even realize, but it's been 7 years since I've been doing this, and as I talk to new CEOs who are thinking about starting a company or have started, I suddenly feel like I'm on the other side where I have things to share with them, which is funny to me because I believe we have just started and we are still learning. To me, it's the best self-improvement project that I could have signed up for. You cannot hide. You have to face conversations and challenges and issues. It's a constant learning, and it's a huge privilege. I'm very lucky to have a support system for my peers, my family, my team, my investors, and my customers to let me do what I'm doing. It's a huge privilege, right? But there's also a huge cost to it. It's it can be quite overwhelming. Your family is signs up for this ride. They don't get to experience the highs that you do, but they do get to experience the lows that you do, because you need someone to go and talk to, and those things take a toll, right? So anyone who is thinking of doing this, I would suggest do it. This would be the best job that you do in your life, but also make sure that you have a support system, right, from your family, from your team, customers, investors, because every bit helps, right? And you need a lot of support. It's a tough gig, but again, it's a huge privilege to do what I'm doing. So I'm very thankful.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for doing this. I think it's going to be really useful. I know it's going to be really useful, and we'll do this like 2 years from now. But
Yes.
I really appreciate kind of taking the time to talk to us, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, Josh, thank you again. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope this can help someone. But I would love to connect with you again in 2 years and see where we are. It would be a great.
It's going to be super successful. Honestly, Fivetran took
Yeah.
7 years to get moderately successful, and then the flywheel just became huge around like 2020.
Yeah.
So like, I think Fivetran is going to be worth like tens of billions. So
yes,
I think Elucidata is in good company there.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I'd love to learn more from them. Compare notes.
Hey, next time you're in SF, let me know. I have a personal connection to them, and maybe we can all get dinner or something.
Yeah, I'll take you up on that.
Cool, man. Hit me up, and we'll take a walk and get some dinner. But I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh.